Hi, everybody. It's so exciting to see everybody in person. So thank you for being here. And hello, people out there in Internet TV land. So I just want to thank Tim Lorden, who actually went out and got us cookies. So if anybody wants a cookie who's going to be crumbled, this is, they're out there, or I can just throw them out into the audience if somebody's ready for a snack. And kudos to this the Convene space is awesome. This is the first time I've been here. I missed State of the Net in person this year, so this is great. So welcome to the panel. We are the unintended consequences of GDPR, what happens when the third-party cookie crumbles, hence the cookies. So let me just do a quick introduction of my panelists today. I have Rick Lane, who needs no introduction, but he is CEO of Iggy Ventures. Rick is a tech policy expert, child safety advocate, and founder of Iggy Ventures. Iggy Ventures advises and invests in companies and projects for public policy initiatives that can positively impact society. Before this, we've known Rick for many things, and we can pick one, but most recently 21st Century Fox. I'm going to just mention Fiona Alexander is not with us today. Hopefully she will be sending some things online. She unfortunately caught COVID, and we tried to see if we could bring her in virtually. It was just a little too difficult for today's setup. So Fiona, feel better. We miss you. Lartice Tiffin is Executive Vice President of Public Policy at the Interactive Advertising Bureau, or IAB. He's public policy team, which works on advocacy on behalf of IAB for 700 members. So they're on both the buy and sell side of advertising, which is really cool. And he has spent plenty of time in Washington. He most recently worked for our current vice president when she was a senator. And you also worked for, oh my gosh, I'm going to blank on this one. Was it Feinstein? Yes, Dianne Feinstein. Okay, sorry, a little memory there. And then Emil Ochata, am I saying that correctly? Okada. I'm getting all that wrong. He is Senior Director of Privacy Governance Engineering at Google. He is currently the lead for privacy governance at Alphabet and the data protection officer. His role includes a broad set of responsibilities, notably the detailed review of Google products launched from a privacy perspective. So we have a rock star group here today. And since we're a close group, we're going to have a conversation, but I'm going to invite kind of questions along the way, and we're sharing microphones, so you might have to kind of give us a second here. I'm going to just start with the questions. So when the GDPR let's say that when the cookie notice jumped the pond from Europe to the United States, for me, it really felt like it was because of GDPR, because you had a lot of lawyers in the United States that weren't sure how they should manage the legal risk. And so all of a sudden, we all get these cookie notices when we go to, especially, I mean, sometimes apps, but more on websites. And it was just sort of a safety measure. And I just find it to be annoying friction. But I'm wondering, you guys are in the business. Do you think it has helped people have a better understanding of what information flow is going across? And I don't call it privacy. I think of it as data flow or data protection. So let's just start with, does this cookie really mean anything? And if it crumbles, are we okay with that?
Hi, thank you. Thanks for leading with me. I think that leaves me a lot of ground to cover. So I think it's an interesting question. I think that maybe there's two pieces to tease apart there. One, you referred to the cookie notice, but also you referred to, do people understand the data transfer, right? So those are two different things. I think on the cookie notice part, two thoughts. One, from a global company perspective, I think it makes sense to be consistent in terms of how the experience looks across all of the users. And so it's actually, it's pretty complicated to try and manage, over here it looks like this, over there it looks like this. So just from a global company perspective, you tend to see that consistency and those consistent choices being made. So that would be, one of the reasons why I would think it, jump the pond in terms of those notices. I'd say in terms of the other question about how well do people really understand, how it works and where data is going and stuff like that, I think the short answer is not well. I think people don't generally understand how cookies work and whether data is moving from point A to point B. So the one thing I might say we might be benefiting from in terms of seeing those notices, and I'd have to say that it's probably a pretty small benefit relative to the friction, is just the awareness that there is the whole issue out there. So, I mean, I think that's the short answer to your question. Probably not a ton. It did that all by itself, but that dropped the mic. Dropped the mic early.
Right. That doesn't happen on Zoom. See, we need to remember what physical items are like. Okay, I think that's safe. Okay. I know, we're kind of scared of it now.
Yeah. And with that, I will pass it on.
Martise, you go.
I'll see is this one? Okay, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in terms of the cookie, it's I think it's important to note that it's what is used in order to help from our industry advertising, right? So a lot of the cookie helps with advertisers being able to know if their advertisement is reaching a certain person. It's important for things like frequency capping, which is, if you show an ad that person may have already seen, you want to limit the number of times that person may see it because you don't want to turn it into an annoyance. You also don't want to spend all your limited campaign funds going over and over to the same person. So cookies help facilitate that. It provide information to the advertiser, letting them know, hey, this person has seen this and things like that. I mean, I think on to the earlier question around notices and cookies. I mean, I think that what we're all concerned with is creating friction, which was mentioned earlier, and a bad user experience. And it kind of turns people off. I know for myself, I think when GDPR went into effect, what happened is that you just got a lot more notices and people were just clicking through it. No one was actually going and spending the time reading. So I question whether it actually helped people to have that sort of situation. I think we've always had this problem with consumers and users taking the time to read all the disclosures that they're provided. So I do question the utility of it. So that's my sort of point of view.
Yeah, I think, you kind of have to go back to the history of kind of advertising online and the information that was being collected. Back in the days when there was 3 television networks, everything was contextual ads. You got beer commercials during the football games. I mean, it was pretty simple. You didn't feel they were intruding on you. They didn't know if you were buying beer. All it was is you're watching football and you get a beer ad. As we migrated from contextual advertising online, which is what really started, to targeted advertising, the complexity and the information being collected started making people nervous. And those were the early days of privacy. I always like to say, what you don't understand, you fear, and what you fear, you try to kill. And I think there was a knee-jerk reaction even early on, back during when Billy Tozan was chair of the Commerce Committee. There was privacy legislation moving forward. I was at the U.S. Chamber at the time, and we fought it because we didn't know where things were heading. We didn't want to kill this potential golden goose. But we also didn't have the complexities, the algorithms, and the storage capabilities that you have today, and the power and the computing power. You fast forward, and people started getting, all of a sudden they were hearing about beacons and all these other types of things that are web beacons, and cookies, and all these other types of pieces of code that were on your computer. When you visited a site, you didn't know which ones were which. I remember when we owned MySpace, I had to go up to the Hill to explain to the House Oversight Committee that the pictures that they were seeing on MySpace weren't on the MySpace servers. They were coming from a thing called PhotoBucket. We just allowed for them to come, and they're like, but Rick, they're here. I printed them out. They're your pictures. Like, no. So, what do you do in that situation? We ended up buying PhotoBucket, so that way we could control it. I mean, but because we didn't like the pictures that were going up on MySpace. And so, so this fear of like how the internet works, IAB does a great job of explaining that, but it's still, when you see the diagrams, it's like all over the place. And so it became very complex. So what has happened, starting with the EU and the GDPR, the e-privacy directive, which really started kind of the cookie issue, is that elected officials started hearing from their constituents, we don't know what's going on and we don't know how to stop it. So the easiest thing to do is to create notices to say, hey, if you're really interested in this, here you can opt out. And we're seeing that with the US legislation that was just marked up yesterday, whereas now you can't do targeted advertising towards kids, right? Knowing if you know that there are children 16 and under. So there's all these issues that have been percolating over time, but the real question is this, I agree, I don't think having all these notices are helpful. Because it's so overwhelming. Like, how many people here read the privacy notices that they get with their bank statements, every 6 months? Yeah. And you know what the thing is you hope that at least one person's reading it, because it's really bad, they'll let the rest of us know.
Non-lawyer in the room.
Nope, I'm a non-lawyer as well, which I hate that term, by the way. I was like, you're either a lawyer or a non-lawyer. It's always bothered me. But anyhow, but I do think that we're at this point where we do need to do a better job of educating, but we also have to have the technological mechanisms in place to help people feel comfortable with the information that is being collected about them.
So I want to take a step back now that we've kind of table set here. Emil, let's just talk about the actual technical function of cookies. And can you walk us through the difference between first party, third party, and any other variation that we need to know about? Safe transfer there.
Sure. I think fundamentally a cookie is storing a little bit of information, and I think that's probably where the name came from. So it's storing information.
I don't see any sequitur to that, but go ahead.
No, you don't? Well, maybe I've been an engineer too long. But let's just see, it's small, it's convenient, it's, so it's a little bit of information. A little bite of information. How's that?
Fair.
Okay. To use that as an example, your browser stores information about the sites that you are visiting, right? So it's convenient when you return to that site to have that stored information. So, for example, it could be, your favorite color is blue. Well, to use that as your background in the website, maybe not that useful. But maybe it's the things you put in your shopping cart when you were visiting that website. We'll store that in a cookie. Now, that's actually convenient. Or it could be your login credentials or your preferred language. So those are all very useful things that are being stored in cookies so that when you revisit the website, it can remember that information. And if it's your login credentials, it basically allows that website, to customize and remember a bunch of things about you, right? Associate that with your account. So is that clear? I mean, that's kind of what the cookie is doing fundamentally. Yeah, go ahead.
I think you missed a point, which is the site you're visiting says, I want you to store this information and then give it back to me later. So it's not that the browser knows your favorite color is blue. It's that you told the site your favorite color is blue, and then it asked you, hey, if I ever ask you this question, tell only me what the answer is.
That's a very good clarification.
You can't ask for those cookies. That's a big difference between first.
I was going to get to first party versus third party, but just to repeat what you said, because I'm not sure whether on the mic whether everyone gets that. But the point that Jonathan is making is that, in terms of where that information came from in the first place, generally the site needs to ask you or prompt you somehow for that information, right? And then it tells the browser basically to save that information. Another good point about that is that it's uniquely scoped. It's stored only about, it's on your browser, so it's only about that browser. And it's also scoped to that particular origin, to that particular website. So you can think of it as, if you see Amazon.com on the top, that's what it's scoped to. Now, the key difference when we're talking about, like, if you see on the URL bar, Amazon.com, it doesn't mean that all the cookies originate or were requested by or sent back to Amazon when you visit the Amazon.com site. It's possible that when you visit the Amazon.com site, there are requests that come from, whatever cookies were that Amazon added to their page to allow other of their partners, other domains, to also get information. And I think, we had the example earlier about pictures that were being served on MySpace that came from another domain, right? But it looks like it's from MySpace. So for this example, you can get a cookie that when you visit the Amazon.com site goes back to, say, another advertising company or to somebody else. And if the cookie is going to some other site than what you see in the bar at the top, that's called third-party cookie. Technically, it's all kind of implemented the same way, but that is the distinction between a third party and a first party cookie. So if it's actually going to the site you're visiting, we call that first party. If it's going to some other site, some partner, some helper that's helping provide pictures or advertising services, or for example, just analytics about, who are the people that are visiting the site, as we have from Google Analytics and other companies, then those are all considered third party. Does that help?
That's very helpful.
And Shane, if I can just add, and that's where that creepiness, when it went from third-party cookie, so there's, one, as I was giving an example of watching the NFL football game, you got the beer ad. When I went to site A, I was expecting only to be engaging with site A, and then next thing I know, I've basically engaged with 30 different entities that I didn't know were behind the scene, dropping cookies on my computer. And all of a sudden, when I go to site B, all those cookies track me to site B and different advertising, and it goes so on and so on. And that's that creepiness you heard from members of Congress and elected officials and others about, I was saying something out loud and then I saw an ad.
Right.
Is my iPhone recording me and now serving me, I'm getting ads based on that. That's always the unknown. I'm not going to get into that debate. But the question is that creepiness. And that's what Congress is trying to address. Because I always found it really interesting when we would poll on privacy, privacy would be like 80% people think there's, that their privacy is important. But then you'd go, I remember going to Disneyland, and people were handing over their information so that they could skip the line. They didn't ask where the information was going and what they were going to do with it. Or in the old days, you would put you fill out those cards for a trip to, the islands at Dunkin' Donuts, right? Where do you think that information? There was no privacy policy there. So everyone says that they care about privacy, but sometimes their practices contradict. But I knew I was giving that information here. The hard part is when you just don't know who else is collecting it on that site. And that's where the notifications, and that's where the concern, and that's where the policymakers, that's what they're trying to address.
Great. Ortiz, let's get you into this conversation.
Yeah, I think, I agree that there's some concern. People don't have all the transparency about what's happening. But I think they should know, part of it is, with marketing and advertising, that they're going to be served advertisements. A lot of this is due to, the fact that a lot of the things that we enjoy, the services that we enjoy, rely on advertising. And so there are options to opt out of advertising. So there's a lot of, there's opt-out capabilities. But I think people should be aware that opting out really just means you're opting out of personalized advertising. So, for many people, you're still going to see advertisings, they may be less relevant. So I think the value there for people is, do you want to see something that you may be interested in purchasing versus something you may not be interested in? I think that is sort of a distinction. I also think it's important to note that a lot of what happens in advertising is important to our economy right now. I think a lot of the folks who are debating federal privacy are losing the fact that the digital advertising industry is enormous. It's a huge part of our economy. There are many, many businesses, many, many jobs that are dependent on it. And so if you start restricting the ability to have personalized advertising or advertising in general, you make those less valuable. And so that means then less money and less revenues go there. That means people lose jobs, businesses don't survive. It also, I think the other thing to sort of think about in this whole first party versus third party is, if you are a new business or small business and you want to start up, you don't have first-party data. You sort of need to sort of use third-party data to sort of jumpstart your business. By removing the ability to have third-party cookies and use those, is that you are also in some ways entrenching the dominance of those who have first-party data. So companies that are already existing and already have a ton of data. And I think that's something important to know. The third-party cookie kind of helps facilitate the ability for other people to get in and help personalize and compete with others for those same customers and those same eyeballs, which we lose. And there's other operational issues too with losing the third-party cookies, because every cookie is not the same. They're doing different things. They're not all, they have different responsibilities and things like that. And so you lose all that functionality. So there's some value that I think policymakers are losing, but I'm sad though that they're only focusing on what they think are like 2 or 3 companies that they think are big tech and bad, and they're willing to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Essentially, they're willing to break the internet and break our economy in order to punish 2 or 3 companies, and I think that's sad.
So, Lartice, I realized that one thing I jumped over on your CV is that you used to be at Amazon doing ads. And so I want to put a couple things together here. One is when, I'm an Apple user, and when they did the ATT app tracking transparency, I always want to forget what that one T is. It was interesting to me that if I put my new operating system on, next time I opened an app, it would ask me a series of questions, which I like. I've always said I wanted them to be emojis, and I've talked to the App Association about this, and they keep telling me, like, stop calling. But the whole idea is, that it'd be like, it's asking for my information, which part of it am I not going? So I would know, like, there's 5 things that are important to me, and yeah, I'm getting in an Uber or a Lyft, so it needs my geolocation, but I'm not sure why it needs all my contacts, or maybe I'm doing something that specifically will make the app not work. So when they did this, it was interesting from the market perspective, how the big news out of this was, so you would have the ability now to see what this information, what they were collecting, that Facebook lost and Amazon actually gained in that space. And part of that was just the model. So can you kind of walk us through why something like that would actually make a difference in outside of even this policy area, but that policy change on their device made a difference in the advertising area?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the fact that Amazon could start an advertising business and do really well on it just shows you how, competitive industry is, right? A lot of people thought it was, Google and Meta, and then all of a sudden another company comes in play. And we're seeing other companies as well. I think TikTok and other companies are growing as well. There's a lot of dynamicism going on because our economy in this industry is constantly innovating. Right now, everything's moving towards streaming, right? So there's a lot of value. Everyone's heard about Netflix getting into the business as well. So I think that it's lost on them. They don't realize that there is a lot of competition. A lot of people are competing for consumers, and so there's that part of it. To go to your point, they each offer different value propositions. I think for Amazon, the ability to see when someone comes to the website, searches for a product, and then that they actually buy the product is huge. I mean, I think that you can actually see end to end the impact of the advertising that brands and marketers and people who are selling products can generate from that and benefit from that. So you have a lot of visibility into what's happening. I think that is a unique proposition. Other people are starting to emulate that. This is where we're seeing a lot of retail media networks starting to create value. Other retailers are getting into it. Walmart's getting into others where that value proposition, where you can say, I'm going to show marketing and advertising to someone, and then I can show you the impact of that person ever purchased products based on what they saw. Other people, I think, also have differences there that are not quite the same when you have an ability to see end-to-end, like Walmart, Amazon, Target, and a lot of other people who are in that sort of space where they can sort of do that. That's just, sort of my perspective. I do think that, if we do away with the ability to have third-party cookies, I think those who have first-party data, those who have the ability to see the consumer from beginning to end and interact with them, have an advantage.
So let's put this into perspective. You had talked about the Nielsen ratings. So that just reminds us that this is not a new practice. It's just new practice with technology that's actually has a finer point on it. And then we'll get to you.
Yeah, so, back in the old days, the ratings were ratings, right? You've got Nielsen, there's one company, and advertisers use basically that one company to determine what they were going to pay you for advertisements. And it was a sort of, they wrote them down in a book, and it was just crazy. And then they got people meters. That was the next level of technology. But, getting back to what Lartice was saying, it is all about network effect. And so when he says that, Amazon was able to compete with Google, yes. And I'm glad about that, but Amazon's a $1 trillion corporation. Yes, they can compete against Google and Facebook or Meta. It's all about network effect. And when you're dealing with advertising, the reason that we could sell Super Bowl ads on Fox for $5 million or $20 million, and it kept going up for a 30-second ad is because we had a bunch of people watching. Our network, the Fox network, had a network effect of bringing everybody in based on content. So advertising is always drawn by the network effect. That's why at once there's only 3 network stations, or 3 television stations. Fox was the 4th. No one thought it could survive. Same with ratings. Think about CNN. No one thought you could compete against CNN, and Fox News came along and competed with CNN, and that led to MSNBC, which was Microsoft. That's why it's called MSNBC. It was a Microsoft play to gather more data. So, these companies that are incredibly large, they like to say, oh, well, this is getting rid of third-party cookies is going to hurt small businesses. But when the companies that are engaged in the third-party cookie placements are so large and able to put a cookie on thousands and thousands of websites across the net, as an advertiser, and I look at MySpace as a perfect example. In my view, what killed MySpace was the Google deal. And the reason I believe that is when we did the $900 million Google deal, we gave Google 2 important things. We gave them remnant advertising and search. So basically, they became the ability across all of MySpace to gather all the data on every user in MySpace and then sell the remnant ads, which are ads that are left over that MySpace couldn't sell. So as an advertiser, if I'm Coke and I have MySpace saying, come spend $1 million on MySpace for an ad, and you get access to all of our users, and Google comes in and says, give us $1 million and we'll give you MySpace and 10,000 other different websites. As Coke, where am I going to go? Am I going to just stick with that one? So the ability to collect information across thousands of websites, and that's where Zuckerberg was brilliant, is that Microsoft tried to do the same thing with Bing. Bing was going to wanted to become the search engine for Facebook, and they were smart enough to say no, because they knew the data that they were collecting was going to fuel and be the fuel for them to get advertisers. They don't sell data. They say that all the time, and they're right, because that is their economic engine. But what they did do, which was really smart and gave people the creepy factor, is they put little like buttons all across the net. And those like buttons, whether you clicked on it or not, was tracking you. They knew if you were a Facebook individual and you were signed in, if you went to all these sites. They were gathering that data. They could use that for advertising. So the network effect in advertising is the key factor of being successful. And what has happened is the big engines of Google and Facebook and others have been able to monetize that, as they should, as any good business, but the rest of the lower end of the tail has basically died away. How many local newspapers are still around? I mean, again, their fault or not, that's the impact of the advertising juggernaut that has occurred over the past 20 years.
Sure.
Yeah, please.
So getting back to the third-party cookie, I think, the question of whether it, what are we doing in terms of that cookie crumbling? As you're probably aware, there are a number of browsers that have already basically stopped or turned off third-party cookies. We believe very much in, putting the user first. That's the foundation of what Google was built on. And I know there have been some, stumbles along the way, shall we say, but I think we still actually believe in that very much. And part of that is keeping the broad internet free and open. And so very much along the lines of what Lartiz was saying, in order to do that, you have a number of smaller companies that need to be able to do responsible advertising in this space. And the third-party cookie, the cookie as it was designed, as I described it, is pretty simple, but it's also kind of open to abuse because of that. It has can be used, as with most technology, it can be used responsibly or irresponsibly. And so what we're looking at now, and you guys are probably aware of this, with the Chrome browser, what we're trying to do is to work across not only the public perception of actually reducing and eliminating third-party cookies, and we've announced that we're going to do that with Chrome, but also work with the IAB, work with industry as well, work with regulators, and we've already announced that we're going to take the guidance from the UK regulators on exactly how we should do this, and try and navigate something that's very difficult to navigate, of continuing to provide support for those responsible uses in terms of building APIs or basically the services into the browser that advertisers can use to continue to do the important and responsible things while actually deprecating and getting rid of those sort of not as responsible uses of the cookie. And so that's what we're trying to do in this space in terms of how we navigate this such that we can continue to support this free and open, this broader internet, which we very much believe in, while actually making improvements for users and for user privacy.
And if I may add, I think, one of the things that's sort of missing is that how valuable digital advertising has been, and that if you eliminate third-party cookie, you make it less valuable. A couple things. One, before digital advertising, what you had is that if you wanted to advertise, you had to go to a TV network. There were a limited amount of those, and the price to getting on was super expensive. Now with digital and mobile advertising, the entry point for companies, new entrants, especially small businesses, is a lot lower. And that's thankful for the internet being free and available to all. I think another point that people should realize is that, there are so many people who have been able to survive the pandemic because of digital advertising. So there are a number of companies where they had physical stores and they closed down, and they shifted to online sales and advertising, and were able to either sustain themselves or grow their business substantially because they were able to use digital advertising. I think, again, a lot of policymakers don't realize how many people are dependent on the free flow of the internet and digital advertising. And if we just start deciding we're going to get rid of third-party cookies because we don't like the behavior of a few people, all of a sudden you're going to have all these unintended consequences, and there are going to be a lot of people who are going to lose their livelihood and their jobs because of that. So I think we need to be careful in what approach we take. And so, what we may be concerned with right now, I don't know if we should edge it into stone, into a law, because things change very quickly. And so that's one thing I would actually add.
Yeah, Rick, go ahead.
Yeah. I am all for advertising. I mean, I think it's obviously important. It's the engine, so it makes this country have, as you said, so many free things. So I just want to be clear, I'm not against advertising online, and it does have tremendous benefits to the economy. I think that's without question. I think the concerns that Congress is trying to address is the issue of being tracked when you don't know you're being tracked. That's the simple issue. Again, I don't think anyone up on the Hill, well, there may be a few members who don't like certain advertising. We got to deal with that. The network side, alcohol was one that was banned for a while, hard alcohol, but not beer. But the issue is that there are, members, so all the members agree with you. I mean, there's no question about advertising. The question is, when are you being tracked? How are you being tracked? And what rights do you have being tracked? And then especially as it deals with children. And are children being manipulated by targeted advertising because of the way the algorithms can help dictate or push in a direction that they may not have gone through an ad that came through a contextual type of advertisement. Like, I know that kids like race cars, because they're on the Hot Wheels website. So yes, maybe they get an ad for NASCAR or something like that. So it's contextual. But is there the ability to manipulate children, which is why we have a lot of rules on children's television advertising. Ed Markey has always been in the forefront of that. But to ensure that we're not harming children when they're not at a point in their brain development to understand that they are being manipulated or not. And so that's the question that Congress is trying to address.
Maybe that should be our cookie notice. You are about to be manipulated.
Well, advertising is manipulation. I mean, it is.
Just
Buy
the thought.
this. You never knew you wanted it,
Right.
but buy it now. And
So-
again, that's not a bad thing per se.
I think that's part of the problem is some of these words are very loaded, and I think they have a negative connotation. And I think that you know, by using terms like, oh, it's manipulative, things like that, it's actually helping people discover things they may not have otherwise known that they were interested in doing. And for kids, I'm a dad, and I let my daughter use technology. I think technology is a wonderful thing. You know, the ability to figure out, okay, there may be new educational programs and shows that people can use that you didn't know about. So I think of it as an opportunity to sort of say, hey, here's a Sesame Street. You like Sesame Street? Well, let's try Disney. You know, there's some other things that you can do. So I think, like, we need to think about let's not put a broad stroke across all of it, and which I think by using sort of these terms, it could be, because I think saying that advertising is about manipulation, I would slightly disagree with that because it has a very negative connotation to it.
So I don't doom scroll, I glam scroll. And so I'm not allowed to buy anything on Instagram between midnight, let's say 6 a.m. because every once in a while those packages show up and you're like, huh, let me guess what's in there before. I have no idea what's going to be in that package. I'm usually pretty excited though once I open it sometimes. So let's talk about regulation. And I'm going to get away from big tech and let's talk about the big don't, which is a lot of what's going on in Europe, who, thank you, gave us the cookie notice, right? So we have a couple things going on. We've had GDPR has been around for about 5 years. They just, I really don't understand how the Europeans do anything. They enacted, they enabled, they chatted for a long time. They had a trilogue, and now they're going to do something called the Digital Markets Act, which has been semi-improved until it goes to the States. Y'all figure that out. So they have the Digital Markets Act, the GDPR, and now they have the Data Act. And I've read through all three of those, and in the back of my brain, I just think, you cannot comply with all three of those concepts at the same time. So I think if I'm a corporation who wants to somehow share information, may it be first party, third party, there's all these kind of like the metrics is like this, you have to decide where your risk portfolio is, right? Like, you know, like which one of these am I going to comply with because I'm scared it's going to cost me money is really the driver behind that, versus which one is probably I'm going to get a slap on the wrist and told to act in better standing with, I don't know, Liechtenstein. So I'm very curious, and I want to go back to the technology part of this, because I think that I harken back to a long time ago when I was talking to some engineers and they were whiteboarding something for me, and they said, I was looking at it and it had this like hard left turn, and I was like, what happened there? And they go, that's your fault. I was like, how can it be my fault? I just showed up. They said, that's a policy decision. Like and I was like, I'm so attuned to that now when I think about how we augment what could be a very streamlined process because we make not really good policy decisions from a technical perspective. So if you can take my rants and make that into something you want to talk about, go right ahead.
So as you mentioned at the beginning, the team that I'm broadly speaking the head of deals with and looks at basically all of the launches, all the products that we're doing across the company. It's a kind of big company, and that team, by the way, is several thousands of people. So we're very dedicated, to privacy. As I know you might not see it on the outside, but it truly is like our #1 priority on the inside. And so when we think about, you mentioned the raft of laws, and of course you only mentioned 3. I mean, there's the e-privacy directives, the age-appropriate design code, then in California, CPRA, and so on and so forth, right? The list is long. So I think of compliance as kind of here. From my perspective, I always guide our teams in terms of, well, privacy is actually here. And we're trying to meet actually a higher standard than that. In terms of actually thinking to your core principles of, what really does put the user's interest first. So I guess the short answer in terms of what you're saying is, well, there are regulations that are coming, and of course, we will focus on making sure that we're compliant with those things. And those generally come with a lot of paperwork as well to make sure that we are compliant. But in many cases, such as in the case of GDPR, the things around transparency and control, around all those kinds of things, we were already there before those laws. And so that is kind of where I strive to be in terms of the notion of laws coming down the pipe and compliance and so forth. So that's my perspective.
Yeah, and if I may, this is where I think, again, people don't realize that what we're seeing now is actually helping those who are already established maintain their establishment. Because if you look at this patchwork of state laws that are developing, if you're a small business, medium-sized business, you don't have and can't afford to hire thousands of lawyers to figure out how do you comply with a patchwork of state laws. Instead of spending money that you would want to spend on developing products and services that your customers enjoy, now with this patchwork, you have companies out there figuring out, okay, when I have customers in California, I have to do X. When I'm in, 100X. When I'm in, Utah or Virginia, I have to do something else. And that is not helpful for small businesses. The compliance burdens are enormous. And it's only growing as we see more and more states look to adopt and create their own laws. I think we should be concerned with that. And I think that's why having a one federal standard that all would have to comply with would be better. It'd be easier and more beneficial for small businesses if we had that. And that's what we need in our country. If Europe can get and do GDPR, we here in America can do a similar law. Actually, in fact, we can do better. And so I think that's what we need to be striving for. We should not be striving for a 50-state solution plus federal. I think that only just continues with the complexity. We need one standard here, and I think it'll most benefit those who, again, can't afford to hire a bunch of lawyers. And I said as a lawyer. So anyway, I'll let you go.
As a non-lawyer.
Well, yeah, well, as a non-lawyer, no. And the other thing, and to give kudos to IAB and entities like the App Association and others, they actually are incredibly helpful in this space for small businesses. Like, they help guide you through a lot of these processes. And so, it's not just that they're up on the Hill lobbying on issues, but they do provide tremendous amount of incredible services to their members to help them figure out a lot of these complex issues. And I agree, one federal law, I'm supporting the legislation that's moving through Congress now. Having that one federal law will be very helpful. I agree, you can't have 50 plus one. That doesn't make any sense. But you still have to provide the ability of state and local entities to do something, but under the guise of the federal law. One of the pieces of legislation I worked on a long time ago was the CAN-SPAM Act. And I always thought the CAN-SPAM Act was the perfect model for privacy legislation. And I think that's where we're heading, which is, that's your board meeting. But the CAN-SPAM Act said we're going to have one federal standard, and yet there's going to be the ability of state AGs and others to bring cases, and there's a civil process, and there's processes in place. And it did a lot. MySpace had one of the biggest CAN-SPAM civil cases to help shut, what was it, the Spam King, was the gentleman was called. And we helped shut that down. Virginia did a lot of great work in the state. Steve Delbianco probably knows about all that work because they were very proactive because they had AOL and all that. So there is a role for the states, and that's where I think this legislation is heading. But at the same time, I do agree that one standard makes a big difference and helps a lot of businesses across the board.
OT, since I know you have to go, any last thoughts from you?
I have, unfortunately I have to run to a board meeting, but, well, actually, fortunately, but.
Bosses, if they're listening, he's looking forward to
I'm looking forward to going to my board meeting. So here's the thing, I agree with you. I would like to see state AGs enforce the federal law. I think that's the way to sort of continue to have states' involvement in it by providing for that. I think, but that's different than saying we're going to have 51 laws, right? It's going to be one law that each state can enforce, as well as the FTC. We're all for that. We support that. I also want to say that our industry supports this. We actually were one of the proponents of this Privacy for America framework, which have been talking about this for the last 4 years, providing consumer rights, providing access for data when people are using it responsibly, and banning it where they're not. I think we all realize that we're in a world right now where consumers expect privacy and to be able to know how their data is being used, and we're already innovating and providing that. Like you said earlier, Google's already announced their Google Privacy Sandbox. Apple is doing something as well. I think all the companies are already acting long before there was a need to act in the U.S. So anyway, I'll stop there. I will stick around for a few more minutes. I realized there was, I got a little bit more time, but I'll at least let that be my big final thought.
So one of the things we haven't touched on is the cross-border data flows from the idea of, we had the bridge, and then we had the privacy shield, and Schrems helped knock both those down. I'm thinking an umbrella. We like visuals, right? Do we get an umbrella next? How important is it that we figure this out and are capable of doing a data transfer from a transatlantic or just a global perspective?
It's huge. I mean, the free flow of data is how we democratize the internet and allow everybody to be able to participate. And if you have something where people are creating these walls that prevent data from moving around freely, you get regimes like China, right? You get regimes like Iran where people are stifling information. We don't want that. We don't want a separate internet. We don't want 4 or 5 different versions of the internet. I think for us, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we can transfer data. Now, this issue between the EU and the U.S., it's about the concerns in Europe over what they perceive as in the U.S. A surveillance state in terms of how our intelligence apparatuses are used to gobble up data. There's concerns around that. But I think that we need to kind of figure out a solution that is workable so that we can continue to have free flow of data and that we don't turn into, like I said, some of these other countries that are not what I consider to be the model example when it comes to freedom. And, so I'll stop there.
I think, I never liked the term free flow because being a content entity, when you think free, you think everything should be free. I always liked the term, I called it the seamless flow of information. And the reason I always thought it was a seamless flow versus a free flow is that you're going to have certain countries that are going to make certain decisions based on their cultural histories that you just have to recognize. And there's never going to be a free flow of information. There's going to be mechanisms in place because you were talking about sort of the new umbrella, the Umbrella Academy, which I've been watching, but the umbrella idea, which creates a seamless flow of how do you do data transfer that allows for as much of the data flow as possible, especially when you're a multinational corporation, because it impacts your ability to have your employees' data flow, right, and health information. And that's a huge problem when you're a multinational. So it's not just on the advertising side, it's not just on the customer side, but it's also on the internal business side of things. But the seamless flow is the best way, in my view, to have a lot of these issues addressed. So you allow for the sovereignty of the countries based on their cultural history. Again, you try to move certain countries more so towards the U.S., but you're not always going to. But you can't wait until those countries are up to our standards. You want to start it now, and then hopefully over time they migrate to be in the right place. So the seamless flow to me, is a much better term and more likely what you're going to accomplish. It's not a plug for the fragmentation event, the next panel, but it really is how things are going to move forward, treaties and other mechanisms that can help us get there.
Just to talk about this from maybe the technical perspective for just a second, when you actually design services and systems to work reliably on the internet, you design them so that the data is dynamic where the data is. It should flow to where the user is. So like I flew here from California, and probably when I checked my email, that data, which may have been in California primarily, moved with me across to a data center that is closer to me to serve me, right? And similarly, if I fly over to Europe, it's got to go there too, otherwise I can't read my email. So I think there are technical implications of some of this, of the cross-border data flows that I've never really seen that they're really actually thinking about. And similarly, if you have a data center, even if your data is primarily in the EU, let's say there's a power failure there or something, right? What typically happens, certainly in Google, is that you're automatically and seamlessly going to be served that data out of somewhere else where the backup copy was being kept, right? And you don't even notice that, right? So if it's the case that, oh, well, you can't get that data anymore, there's actually technical and, usability implications to this. So I think it is really critical that we do have the next generation of a privacy shield. We have the ability to do these cross-border data flows just for the, the usability, the improvement from the friction perspective and so forth. It's what we're used to, and you would see these big changes if all of that went away.
So staying on that kind of technical concept, interoperability is something that has come up in several bills that are both in front of the House and the Senate, and it's also a portion of what is in the Digital Markets Act. I have a concern. I think I'm going to get this right. Jane Brembauer did a lawfare piece. I don't know her, but she is an excellent writer, very long. She talks about how if you bring to comply with, in this case, Europe, because these laws haven't passed in the United States. Thank you very much for being here. Good luck at your board meeting. You actually bring things back in that we've tried to resolve for, and she uses a specific case about interoperability where if I will go to an imaginary thing, Faceplace, I go to Faceplace and I have tagged all my photos and I've tagged all of you guys in them, but now I want to leave Faceplace to go to, I don't know, the animal to my place, and I want to carry all of that information to my new location because I want to just seamlessly go to some new app and have all of this elongated data go with me. But like, kind of, at what point do I have to go back and say, Rick, do I have your permission to take that photo? What information, is there a limit to what goes on? And I have a kind of a dual thought on that, because the other thing is, because I think of things of data, is I also worry that we don't want to be sending tranches of data over to other locations. It's one thing to do it for advertising, but it's another thing. I don't know if I say yes to my information going from one to the other, and all I am is part of, the tranche of information that Rick is moving as part of his portfolio, that how much of my trickle of data, the little crumbs, that's where the cookie thing comes in. That's where I get it. Okay. Forgot about that. It goes along with it. How much of a technical challenge are all these concepts of regulations that are moving forward?
I think there are a lot of technical challenges, some of the ones that I was just referring to.
Yeah, okay.
In terms of like, if you're actually physically moving from point A to point B, you want your data to follow you. I think some of the example that you were referring to as well, when you're talking about, if I understand what was Faceplace,
yes, Faceplace,
and My Place,
yeah.
As your two service providers, and you took pictures in one, and you want to move those pictures to someplace else. It is very likely the case that how Faceplace's engineers implemented their picture system
didn't mean
and
to make it
how
complicated,
My Place's pictures implemented their system are different,
yeah.
right? So, so there's some actual work involved in like moving that data from one to the other. That said, I do know that at least in my company, we also think that's important, and you can actually move pictures, as one example, directly between services. We're working with services, other services out there, so people can move their data. And similarly, you can get all your data out from Google. So then you could potentially take it, I don't think we have yet the standards quite there of how we would import all that data to, the My Places of the world. But I think there's some technical things that we're continuing to work on. But all of those represent challenges that would be much more difficult depending on the kind of regulation that is out there.
And the size of the business.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the areas that most people don't understand is, this idea about data. There's no copyright of data. You can't copyright data. I'm not the lawyer, but it was the White Pages decision. Anybody want to, for those, that was decided that you can't copyright a White Pages. You can copyright a Yellow Pages, but you can't copyright a White Pages. And that set up a huge database fight back in the 90s about who has access to the data and how you can access and how you can control it. But people say, I want to control my name, right? Rick Lane, that's my PII, and I should have control over that. Well, how many people here gave out a business card today? I mean, most people are giving out business cards, right? So now, did you give me permission? So Shane wants to get a hold of Chris, And, does now, can I give Chris, to Shane? Or do I need to ask permission? Those are the questions that never really get asked. And so when you want to transfer a picture of me somewhere, do you have to ask, or do you own the copyright to that? And I just happen to be in the picture, but now Facebook or Faceplace has put my name on it, right? It says it's who I am. Is that mine to say no to? Do I have, and those issues have never really been discussed. Because everyone says, oh, well, it's my data, I should be able to monetize it, I should be able to make money off of it, it's my first name, last name, but that information is out there, and there is no intellectual property over data. There are contractual obligations and rights under data, but there is no copyright over that. And that's the thing that sometimes gets lost in this debate.
All right, we're going to go to questions, and I have rewards for anybody who wants a question. In the back,
cookies out.
the beautiful woman in the black and the yellow back there. I would throw these at you, but I'd probably hit John, so I will give them to you later. Okay.
Thanks so much. Fascinating conversation. I work on the intersection of media and technology policy, particularly the impact on marginalized media or media around the world that aren't part of, don't have their own digital teams to figure out how to do this with advertising. So can you talk a little bit more about what this means for independent media, this shift? And then specifically, given the media sustainability issues that have been created by the advertising ecosystem that most media are constrained to compete and operate in, how would you suggest going about, adjusting to this new reality? What are they going to need to do? And this is, I think, especially important if we're talking about information and integrity, disinformation. Obviously, having good information, reach the right people is really important. So, just a simple little question for you. Thank you.
My panel of experts.
There was a lot in there, so let me try and unpack a few pieces. I think, back to where we're going in terms of third-party cookies, and if those go away, like what is the implication for media companies or smaller companies in the broader open ecosystem? Let me take that as a piece of the question. So I think today, if we look at a number of browsers that have already, those third-party cookies have gone away, I think it is a challenge for smaller players that don't have the large set of data and customers already available to them that they can use basically to understand, for example, how advertising is working. On aggregate, is this ad working better than that other ad or something like that? So I believe that's a challenge. With the work that we're doing with the Privacy Sandbox inside Google Chrome, the idea is to try and to navigate that such that those particular responsible use cases of, giving the example, like I said, measuring the effectiveness of an ad, being able to reach the customers that you are working with or have been working with as an advertiser, people who've visited and that you have a relationship with and so forth. Being able to do those kinds of customer journeys, I think is what we're trying to still accomplish with the Privacy Sandbox. And so given that, I think the implications, if that is successful, which I hope that it will be, are hopefully minimal in the long term. Like I think we may not get back 100% of the utility that we have today, but there will be that trade-off between utility and privacy. But I think in the longer term, the intention is that the implications for the smaller folks on the broader internet should be minimized.
So here's a shocker. I have a company called C2Do to address that specific issue for small, especially on the video side, of how to create revenue without having to go through a Google or others. And the concept is very simple, which is if you look at how a small entity is localized, can you get local advertisers, right? That's how it always starts. Are you getting local advertisers? If you want a national advertiser, that's what would sell, and I'll use a television analogy, networks, right? The Fox network, where you watch The Simpsons and the NFL, That's network advertising. Then they split revenues, and then the local television stations that are not all owned by Fox, they're owned by another entity, that they can sell local ads, and that's where you see the local car dealerships and other types of local ads that you see. You can't do that online. It's very hard. But there are, again, C2Do technology, you can do that now. You now can go and get local advertising. And the other beauty is that from the C2Do perspective, we don't own any of the data. We don't, it's not our data. It's the entity that got it. So it's your customer list. It's, your advertisers. All we're providing is the technological solution to make revenue off of that. And that's the way for the smaller entities that they can compete and build up. And as you build up more and more and you get further out, then you can start getting more advertising, but you're in control. I mean, what happened with the online advertising market, and to Google's credit, and that's how they became, again, a $1 trillion corporation, is they got all the value out of the advertising. And then everyone, so you think about a music video on YouTube. My understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have 1 million views on YouTube, you make about $7,000. 1 million views, $7,000. You can't live on that with 1 million views. But imagine if you were able to get 1,000 views, 1,000 people who each give you $7. So you've made as much money in a smaller amount of people than you would with 1 million views on YouTube. That's where this is heading. That's where the world, I think, is going because of all these rules. And then you can also have this seamless information where you are dealing with localized rules in your area. But once you cross a border, you have to comply with those rules. You try to minimize that through a seamless and treaties and things of that nature, but you still have to comply. So there are technological solutions out there that can get us there. The question is, will they be able to compete against Google? No, but that's not the market that companies like ours are trying to compete with. We're not competing against Google. We are trying to help facilitate local content creators and small content creators to build revenue so that they can survive and make money off of the content that they've created.
Question on this side of the room. How's your paper going? Good? Okay, right. She's got a paper due at the end of this. All right, back on this side of the room.
So I can comment
Sure.
a bit on that.
You can counter comment.
Sure. I don't know that it's a counter comment, but obviously Google is a big company that makes a lot of money.
Nothing wrong with that, by the way.
Rumor has it.
Rumor has it. That said, I still think that we truly do believe of putting the user first. That's an internal motto. Now, it happens that there were some really cool ideas that happened to get the win-win situation, which is, for example, if you type hotel into Google search, hey, you might be looking for ads for hotels. That's actually what you were looking for. That's what you want. So that is the win-win situation. And that is, probably the golden goose. That is the, most valuable idea, very simple idea, on which Google is founded. Now, a piece of that, another idea is that, well, with all those search queries, there needs to be a free and open internet where where that information that people are looking for comes from. And where that information that you're typing in when you want to find out, the rules to some card game, the recipe for something or other, mom's, cookies, different kind of cookies, then, that needs to be out there. So it's really important, and it's aligned. It's another win-win with Google to keep that internet free and open. So yeah, there is financial benefit to the company, but there's also benefit to the users, to everybody out there. And so that is why, back to the earlier point of we're trying to minimize the impact of some of these changes in terms of the technology. That's why there is there's an alignment there. There's that win-win. And so that's why I believe that, we will get to that win-win solution going forward in terms of still providing the support for responsible use of that information, while also improving user privacy.
Courtney, did you want to question or comment?
Nobody else.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd love to ask.
Can you get on the microphone so we can hear you?
Okay. Here.
Justin,
Wait, I got it really set in there.
This one is dangerous, so I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay. So I wanted to follow up because a study in the UK showed that a third of advertising revenue just disappears in the advertising chain between advertisers and publishers. So how can this approach improve that? And do you think that companies should have a requirement, as we're talking about data transparency and access to data across many different domains? We haven't really talked about it when it comes to the advertising sector. So should we be talking about that? And do you think Google would be able to provide more information and more access to data so that we can figure out where is that third of the revenue going? Advertisers don't want to lose their money. Publishers want to get more money. It's somewhere out there.
Do you deal with the advertising side, or go ahead? I'm happy to.
Go ahead and tell the story about how 50% of advertising doesn't work. We just didn't know what 50% until we started doing this with the internet. Okay,
exactly,
safely,
the old saying, right?
I mean, it's safely back in its holder now, okay?
Yeah, the old saying. I mean, a third of the advertising dollars probably go away because there's so many interconnections along the chain, right? I mean, the complexity of internet advertising is absolutely fascinating from a technological standpoint. I mean, the ability in milliseconds to get an advertisement of what you're interested in from somewhere far away and onto your computer, that technology is just brilliant. And that's what the value that companies like Google and others have brought to the table in terms of building that internet advertising infrastructure that IAB members and other entities help lobby for. And so that's probably, my guess is that's where the third goes, is in that maze of web of connections from point A to point B, because there's a lot of stops along the way. But you also have, an auction price, right? And sometimes you have, the auctioneer is also the bidder. I won't say who, but there are certain companies that have that advantage. And then maybe those are some of the things that should be looked at in this process. Again, that's why, from our company, from C2Do perspective, we don't do any of that. You know exactly what, we don't do clicks, we don't do CPMs. We actually call it C2Do because you only pay if somebody does something on the site. So if you have your advertisement out there and no one uses it and clicks on it, you pay nothing. Even if 1 million people view your video, you pay nothing. Because our view is, would I put an advertisement for my diner in New Jersey on the 101 freeway in Los Angeles because 20 million people drive by it, every day? The answer is no. Well, that's sort of how the Internet Advertising Network works. It's like how many people viewed it, not how many people actually did something. So I think there's a lot of loss in that space that can be captured back, again, with a direct relationship. But again, if you want to spread it out to all the websites and you want that type of advertisement, then a Google type of system or an Amazon or others is the only way to go.
So point of parliamentary inquiry, do we know, are we getting questions online and nobody's telling me about those? Do we have any idea? Okay, I have no idea how to get to those. So Jim, can you see them? Did you want a microphone? All right.
Awesome.
All right, so these are a little aged. This one's from Jonathan Zook. Did the notices, so he's talking about the GDPR notices for cookies and stuff. Did it trigger any media coverage of company data sharing practices? Like, were there news stories when somebody, came across one of these cookie notices that suddenly exposed companies are doing X, Y, and Z with your data that people had no idea? Are you aware of any of those?
No, I mean, there are a lot of stories about cookies, but, mostly in the trade press, but I don't think, it was, on, in the front page of the Wall Street Journal.
Okay, and then are there any, this one's from Bill Juris, are there any statistics on how many or what percentage of users ever opt out on some or all cookies?
That would have been a great IAB question.
And what do you do with people like me who accept some and reject most? So.
That's it.
Thank you for that. That was wonderful. All right, we have time for one more question. John, here in the front. Here.
Thanks, Shane. John Perino, the non-lawyer, non-PhD from Stanford University. Can you both discuss a little bit privacy by design, which were the principles that went into both GDPR and the e-privacy directive? Particularly, I'm interested in if you can address the user empowerment and data privacy by default aims of the privacy by design principles, and if those are reflected and actually put to, if cookies help push along the privacy by design aims.
I'm happy to. Yeah, happy to talk about that. So privacy by design is in fact one of the guiding principles that my teams use. My teams of privacy engineers and other engineers use across all of the reviews and discussions that we have throughout the product development lifecycle at Google. So we start with that from the first principles. So, as an example, this piece of data that this app might be designed, might be collecting, do we really need that? Do we really need that piece of how would the app be different? Now, in some cases, like, okay, let's say it's the Gmail app. Do we really need the contents of the email? Yeah, I think we do. Yeah. So in many cases, yeah, you need the kinds of things, but in other kinds of data, maybe you don't, or maybe there's another way that you can get that, or if you're getting that data, so here's a question like, for example, Nest cameras. So if there's a camera being designed, or even your phone camera, if the camera is on, do you need to have a light, for example, and make it a requirement that there is a light next to that camera that indicates the camera is on? That's a design question, and it's something that we now do, right? And it's something that has evolved out of this exact practice of privacy by design, thinking about things right from the beginning of the design process. If you, just as the example to continue that, if you build your camera already and then you're about to ship it the first day, and you have someone say, oh, by the way, you needed a light, that's way late in the process, right? That's a big deal. You'd have to go back basically to square one and rebuild and redesign everything. So it's really important to have those questions and those discussions happening right at the beginning of the process.
Yeah, I agree. Not just privacy by design, but child safety by design as well, which is also being discussed on Capitol Hill, as well as the UK and the EU. So both of those types of issues. One of the ways to do that is with IGI, which is my investment company. I only look at companies that have done that already. So, for example, company Rego that has the only child COPPA certified digital wallet for kids. It was built from the ground up to ensure that we were not collecting any information on children when they were making purchases using a digital wallet or debit card. That was critical. The last thing we wanted to have is a dossier on a kid who, by the time they're 18, on every purchase that they've made. For when I was growing up, my parents gave me $20, and they didn't know how it was spent, but nor did any big data companies know how I spent that $20. Now, because of the cashless society, our company's looking at building that safety, in design. Mizuho Digital Wallets does that. They collect no information on kids' purchases. So that's an example. C2Do the same way. We have a policy. We do not collect any information. We don't even see it. We see no PII of what is going into when you fill out something like a survey or you buy something. We never see it. It's framed. We have no insight to any PII that is going onto the site that's going to the customer base. So looking at investments, when you're investing into companies or buying companies, looking to see what they have put in place to ensure that the thought process was privacy by design, because money talks. And if you're willing to move fast and break things and just do whatever you want to do, you run into certain problems, as we're seeing with certain companies up on Capitol Hill.
All right, we have to give, that doesn't even work, great. So thank you. Just wanted to thank the panelists and thank you guys for deciding to help participate in this discussion. I'm sure we'll be talking about it for a long time to come, and I think we have another group coming in right after us. So just give a hand up for this panel and plan on the next one.